Is suffering an important part of being human? Why? Or why not? Like Bob Ross said, gotta have a little sadness once in a while, so you know when the good times come. I'm waiting on the good times now. It's 2020, you must wait a little longer. Without negative feedback, humans don't know what direction to go to make shit better. Suffering is the crucible through which our understanding emerges. A whale biologist. We better listen to him. He's a whale biologist. It's an important part of growth, as without it, we often won't have the will to change on our own. But that means it's not important after we've already grown. Assuming that personal growth has limits. Suffering made me a much better person. On the other hand, it does also make many people much worse. So I'm not sure if I agree with this argument. I think suffering is one of the essential parts of the human condition. When I see billionaires who inherited their money and never had to get a job they hated and just enjoyed life, they seem less human. I know that sounds awful. You say that, but so many of the stupidly wealthy I've worked around, when you really get into the fine details of their lives, are some of the most miserable people I've come across. As someone on the other side of the poverty coin, it just never made sense to me. You have the wealth to do anything, to satiate anyone however passing, and yet so many of them choose to do little except accumulate more wealth, leading to empty lives of houses yet no homes, associates yet no friends, silence echoing down opulently adorned hallways and empty guest bedrooms yet no peace. If they weren't so often also some of the most horrible people I've come across, I might have some pity for it all. The misery they're feeling is a lack of identity. That's the source of so many people's depression. If you inherit your wealth, never work, never fail, you have nothing to be proud of about yourself. And without anything to be proud of, or anything to work toward, you just feel completely empty as a person. Sure, but that doesn't mean you have to go through trauma and depression as a rite of passage. Only problem is there are way too many variables as to whether or not a person can handle all the different levels of stress and suffering. Some people can handle a lot, and some people can't handle none. I'm not sure if I said that right or not. I'm real sleepy right now. I don't think it's an important part of being human. I think it just is. I get that it can be soothing to assign importance to things, but really, it's all just happening because it can. No rhyme or reason. We're just experiencing what comes our way. So let go of the ugly stuff, especially if it's not helping you grow. Yep, I think Americans especially kind of fetishize it. It's part of the reason the pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality is so prevalent in our society. There is nothing noble about suffering. It can help you learn, but you are almost certainly better off to have avoided it in the first place. I always think the people saying that suffering is good because it made them stronger are the ones who haven't really suffered hard. Suffering in ourselves and our empathy for suffering in others does seem to give rise to great personal qualities like generosity, discipline, patience, etc. It produces great works of art and brilliant inventions in science and technology. It's produced the fantastically complex mind training systems found in Buddhism. But I think it's good to remember that those qualities and inventions are a response to the extremely negative feeling of suffering itself. Suffering itself is extremely negative. As Modest Mouse once said, if life's not beautiful without the pain, well, I'd rather never see beauty again. I say no. Suffering is merely a mostly unavoidable and unfortunate aspect of simply existing. It isn't objectively important or necessarily good or constructive in my view. Simply an inevitable consequence of being alive. The context here is being a human. Literally nothing is objectively important with that attitude. Of course, everything is relative. If you didn't have to struggle or suffer, you wouldn't even know what contentment was. So you think that a baby tasting ice cream can't enjoy the taste unless it tastes something that tastes really bad first. A baby can't enjoy the sound of its mother's voice unless it's heard a terrible sound first. The idea that we have to suffer in order to know pleasure has never made any sense. No. Damn it. And I honestly have no idea why everyone thinks this. I am, obviously by username, a fan of the ancient philosopher named Democritus, along with being the guy that made famous the idea of an atom and a void. He was among the Hellenistic philosophers who were hedonists. That has a bad connotation nowadays, but it basically just says it is moral for the goal of life is to have as much pleasure as possible. Sure, Gautama, life can suck sometimes, but it isn't all suck unless you can achieve enlightenment. No, but it can be useful. I don't believe that one needs to have pain in their lives to empathize with others and want to comfort and support people and not be a jerk. I actually think people are naturally empathetic this way, and it's sorta pushed out of them, along with their natural curiosity and creativity. Just look at how kids often ask their parents why they don't give to the panhandlers, and how much they want to pet any animal that comes their way. I honestly don't think any kid is born being a little shit, but having parents and older siblings like that teaches them real quick. Yes, this is my exact stance on it. I hate those quotes about how we don't know what good is without bad. It's like, no, we don't have to experience literally every single bad thing ever to know what good is. No, that's not what the quote means. It means if you have never ever in your life experienced bad, then there's no way in hell you would know what the good is, because you wouldn't have nothing to reference it by. If you had nothing but good every single moment of your life, it would just be normal to you. You wouldn't be able to say, hey, I'm happy, because it would just be normal. Absolutely not. I think people who say things like suffering makes us better just believe that in order to cope with life's pains, which is fine. But if we didn't suffer, we wouldn't need to become better. We could just enjoy being as we are, without the ever-looming threats of pain and sadness. We could still create things and innovate, just without the fear of failure bringing heartbreak and ruin. I basically agree. Kind of reminds me of this from The Hitchhiker's Guide, for instance. On the planet Earth, man had always assumed that he was more intelligent than dolphins because he had achieved so much. The wheel, New York, wars and so on whilst all the dolphins had ever done was muck about in the water, having a good time. But conversely, the dolphins had always believed that they were far more intelligent than man for precisely the same reasons. So many people in this thread with examples of what suffering helped them achieve or overcome. But nobody ever achieves a world without suffering, which the dolphin gets for free. Yes, usually people who have experienced less suffering or adversity have a harder time empathizing with others' suffering. I think that's the heart of it. Suffering creates empathy. Empathy, the desire to end the suffering of others as much as you want to end your own suffering, is the only thing that will get people to where we all want to be. In the end, it only created bitterness and frustration for me. You can't have the good without the bad. I really think it's just that simple. So you think that a baby tasting ice cream can't enjoy the taste unless it tastes something that tastes really bad first. A baby can't enjoy the sound of its mother's voice unless it's heard a terrible sound first. The idea that we have to suffer in order to know pleasure has never made any sense. Not important, but inevitable. Inevitable, thus important, for being a human at least. Life is a pile of good things and bad things. Sometimes they are different piles. Sometimes they mix up at the edges. But you can never know the value of one pile without the other pile. I believe that what we call suffering is just basic existence. It's just that humans have been gifted enough to understand themselves. So that's why we defined it and called it suffering. We're never happy. We just go and get happiness and then it goes away. It's important because it keeps us driven to improve. But if you break it down, why does it have to even be that way? Existence could be anything, but it's this. You are forced into the laws of nature and the arbitrary needs of human life. Being born is rape. Suffering is learning. Learning from mistakes. Unless you're perfect, there will be suffering. And nobody is perfect. If you learn, you'll suffer less. Yes, I never appreciated my tiny box room more than after coming home from a 20th, not including the wind chill, backpacking trip. A little, or big, dose of suffering makes you appreciate the little things. I agree 100%. But I'm just amazed at the amount of people in this thread that thinks there's no need for suffering to appreciate the good and the joy of life. I'm not sure if it belongs to humans though. Suffering comes with sentience, physical existence and a brain. To notice it is almost pretty much the definition of suffering in my opinion. Yes, without the suffering there wouldn't be an opposite. Well no. I think what the person is trying to say is that we won't appreciate the good times as much unless we experience bad times. I think it's an important part of being alive, not just humans. Without suffering evolution would be a lot slower. A lot slower. As if there is any end goal to evolution, there is no finish line. The speed at which evolution happens makes no difference. It does if you're about to go extinct. Suffering is relative. Someone who's rich and privileged may suffer at middle class and someone who's very poor may be ecstatic at being middle class. I don't think we can ever get rid of suffering, since we tend to raise the bar as we become happier. What thrilled us before becomes old hat. It is important, but I think it's way too severe. In my opinion, I think it is. As a human being, you'll have needs and wants and sometimes, in order to get them, you'll have to go through different phases / sufferings / challenges. No one is really born into pure perfection being rich, having the perfect life, a pretty face, being kind, being loved by people. Although a lot might disagree, because we see numerous billionaires right now, but they all suffered before getting there. Somewhere along the way, they had encountered a huge obstacle which made them who they are today, no matter how big or small. That is something what makes up a person. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates and many more. You might counter my argument by saying the sons and daughters of celebrities, billionaires and millionaires don't / won't suffer cause they got it all, but like I said, somewhere along the way, they'll have to suffer and overcome it to be who they will be in the future. Money might solve a lot of problems, but not all. Absolutely, it's unavoidable. To quote from The Road Less Traveled, life is difficult. This is a great truth. One of the greatest truths. It is a great truth, because once we truly see this truth, we transcend it. Once we truly know that life is difficult, once we understand and accept it, then life is no longer difficult. Because once it is accepted, the fact that life is difficult no longer matters. Most do not fully see this truth, that life is difficult. Instead they moan more or less incessantly, noisily or subtly, about the enormity of their problems, their burdens, and their difficulties, as if life were generally easy, as if life should be easy. They voice their belief, noisily or subtly, that their difficulties represent a unique kind of affliction that should not be, and that has somehow been especially visited upon them, or else upon their families, their tribe, their class, their nation, their race or even their species, and not upon others. I know about this moaning, because I have done my share. Life is a series of problems. Do we want to moan about them or solve them? Stoic Philosophy link. The School of Life. com / the Book of Life / the Great Philosophers. The Stoics / is all about dealing with the difficulties and challenges of life. No matter who you are, an emperor, like Marcus Aurelius, or a slave, like Epictetus, you know that you're going to age and die. Taking a broader view, the historian Arnold J. Toynbee argues that, when we look at the growth of civilizations, as opposed to their stagnation and decay, it's driven by difficulties and challenges, rather than ease and plenty. For example, he describes the sharp contrast between the fertile lowlands of Boeotia and the rocky slopes of Athens, which forced Athenians to cultivate olive trees and to develop trade. It was Athens that was the school of ancient Greece, not Boeotia. Life is suffering. It's impossible to separate the two. Nobody has ever lived without suffering, so the question is meaningless. You start suffering as soon as you're born, and you continue until the moment you die. If you're lucky you get some glimpses of beauty or happiness along the way, but the suffering remains constant throughout every life. Happiness can't exist without sadness. There's a lot to learn from suffering. Did you know that the first Matrix was designed to be a perfect human world where none suffered, where everyone would be happy? It was a disaster. No one would accept the program. Entire crops were lost. Some believed that we lacked the programming language to describe your perfect world. But I believe that, as a species, human beings defined their reality through misery and suffering. So the perfect world was a dream that your primitive cerebrum kept trying to wake up from. I believe suffering, pleasure, fear and desire are fundamental to any life in the universe. Perhaps fundamental to the fabric of the universe itself. It's less about how important it is, and more that it's important to acknowledge that it's not possible to escape all suffering in life. Everyone, from the rich to the poor, healthy or not, will experience suffering in life. We can do various things with the knowledge that suffering is inevitable and universal. We can learn to stop running from it and instead experience it fully. We can remember that no matter how badly we feel, this too will pass. We can connect with others around us through our shared suffering. We can enrich our lives with compassion for those around us and for ourselves. And we can stop hoping for a better future and start living fully in the present. Anyway, check out link.com/this is all stuff I learned because I listened to the Secular Buddhism podcast. Why secular? Because you don't have to use what you learn from Buddhism to be a Buddhist. You can use it to be a better whatever you already are. I literally scrolled for 8 minutes waiting to see if someone took a Buddhist angle when answering the question. Relevant as ever. Bravo. Hey, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.